Hi. Have you ever said to yourself, I'm a perfectionist? What do we mean when we say that? I know in my mind, I've equated perfectionism with being thorough. I know I've equated it with, if you're going to do something, do it right. I know in my head that I connect the dots between perfectionism and higher chances of success. But is that what's really going on? I remember I was in this group activity and I said to everyone, you'll want me on your team. I'll make sure it gets done right. Believe me, you did not want me on your team. Hello and welcome to another episode of Hug Me, I'm Insane. And my name is Perry Johnson. And in that intro, it may have appeared that I was being a little self-deprecating, and well, I was. But what I meant by you would not want me on your team is that you wouldn't have wanted me on your team at that time in my life when I was at that consciousness, specifically operating at that place of, if you're going to do something, do it right. And I would walk around shoving that ethic down anybody and everybody else's throat, including my own. And I've since come to learn that as being what we term perfectionism. And in making this episode, I did a bit of research and I was looking around at some of the signs and symptoms and reasons behind perfectionism, and some of it resonated with me and some of it didn't. And I was going to go through and highlight, based on that research, the things that I've discovered and share it with you here today, sort of in point form or bullet form or whatever. But I decided instead, rather than regurgitating the shit I found on the web, I would just talk about my own understanding of perfectionism and how it's impacted my life and how much better my life is having come to an understanding of my perfectionism and the debilitating effects from it. So I'll start off by saying that my desire to get it right, as I called it, the root of it is in approval seeking. And this stems from my childhood. And as I became an adult, I never felt like I was good enough. And the validation that I was seeking from childhood, I continued seeking in my adulthood. And so the perfectionism was one of the things that was motivating that desire for approval. If I did a really, really outstanding job, somebody would notice and say, wow, that's an amazing job, Perry. And I would get a little ego boost. The other aspect to how I defined what I now know as perfectionism was the idea of being thorough, and how my dad always taught me that if you're going to do a job, do it right. And I still believe that to this day. I don't really think there's any point in doing something half-assed or not done properly, but there is a really, really big difference between doing something properly versus perfectionism. And that's because the perfectionism is rooted in aspects of childhood and self-esteem that require healing. And so the perfectionism, in a way, was a dysfunctional way of me seeking that approval. I hope that that makes sense. So here's the truth that I've since learned about perfectionism, and I can best sum it up by way of a quote from Brené Brown. And she says that perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is not about healthy achievement and growth. That quote from her is in stark contrast to the messaging that I've always given myself in terms of what I now know to be my perfectionism. That place where when I would be doing a job, I would hone in and obsessively go after something as a way of attempting to create the perfect piece to what will eventually be the perfect outcome. But the point is that my perfectionism was having very ill effects on my mental health. And one of the things that you can discover about perfectionism, if you do some research, is the link to OCD. I know for myself, I have very, very strong obsessive tendencies. And a lot of the perfectionism will come out in honing in and focusing on these specific areas that don't require anywhere near that amount of focus and attention. And yet when I'm in them, it seems like the right thing to do. And I'm highly motivated to getting that, whatever that thing is, right. And I will actually lose a great deal amount of time in doing that. And this ties into my ADHD, which I didn't find as many links to in terms of perfectionism, but that's one of the ways that it connects in terms of my own experience with perfectionism. There's a correlation between how I will become obsessive and my attention deficit and the anxiety that comes from the idea of something not being completed correctly. And this is the part where it gets debilitating for me, because it's that idea of it being done correctly where I really will get tripped up and meanwhile lose focus of the big picture. And this is one of the places where my perfectionism diverges somewhat from what I uncovered in my research of it. And that is the idea that perfectionists are often focused on the goal, the end result, and will lose the benefits from the learning process along the way in the journey of achieving that, whatever that thing is. And that hasn't necessarily been my experience, although maybe I'm operating in a blind spot here. But to me, the relationship between the obsession and perfectionism is in the journey. It's in the microscoping the certain details of the whatever it is. So I can give you an example of that in terms of being a songwriter. What I've done in the past is I've come up with an idea for a song and put together a verse and a chorus and some chord progressions and some melodies and things like that and some lyrics. And I'll begin obsessing on getting together a complete song and how that song will sound. And so I'll start working on, say, a backup vocal for the chorus. And I'll spend all this time getting the perfect harmony together for the chorus, and then doubling, tripling, quadrupling those vocals, and then mixing those vocals, and then getting just the right reverb for those vocals, and spend sometimes 2 days just on that one thing. And then I'll come back to the song a couple of days later, and on first listen, realize that it's the shittiest song I've ever written in my life. But I've lost the big picture because I've hyper-focused on getting this backup vocal right, and my perfectionism has taken me down this rabbit hole in terms of getting the perfect backup vocals so that I sound like I'm in Queen or something like that. And so maybe that's what they mean by being overly focused on the end goal, which is to have a complete song. And from that standpoint, I can understand that relationship. But again, my experience has been in how perfectionism will sidetrack me to the point where I have difficulty finishing anything because there's aspects to the project that aren't correct. Similarly, if I have to do some public speaking or something like that, and I'm invited to share somewhere or speak somewhere, and I have to put together something to talk about, my perfectionism will tell me that I'm going to deliver the best talk ever that anybody's ever heard, and they're going to be completely bowled over by it, and I'll start putting together ideas for this talk in order to achieve that goal, and get caught up in some aspect of putting the talk together that isn't coming together as easily as I would like, and I'll become discouraged and I'll end up canceling, or I'll end up not going, or I'll end up ghosting people or whatever. At the very least, it's the source of great anxiety. And when enough half-finished projects pile up, that fact can and has in the past contributed to my depression, because I arrive at the conclusion that I can never get anything done, I can never see a project through, and that tweaks my perfectionism. And I arrive at the conclusion that I'm some fuck-up loser, and what is the point? And boom, there's the depression, and now I'm not getting out of bed, and all kinds of unhealthy coping mechanisms start appearing in my life. And the other aspect of that paradigm is how it contributes to my already negative self-talk, and how I can be excessively self-critical, so that the next time a project or task comes up, again, the perfectionism rears its head and tells me, okay, you're going to get this one right. Not only are you going to get it right, it's going to be amazing. And everybody's going to be like, wow, that's amazing. And now you're going to feel better about yourself. And so this dysfunctional self-esteem booster literally has no end. It can go on and on and on. Meanwhile, having the crippling effects of my not getting anything done and feeling shittier and shittier about myself. So then what I begin to do is procrastinate or opt out of doing things, because at least then I'm not getting it wrong. And procrastination is a huge sign of perfectionism. It's that black and white, all or nothing thinking. If there's even the inkling that we can't do it correctly, we just don't do it. My perfectionism will crop up when I'm sending a text or a simple email. I will rewrite that goddamn one-line email 50 times in order to have it read just so. Perfectionists also are prone to experiencing difficulty in sharing with others' success because we invariably will compare ourselves. How do we measure up to that other person? When we're looking at somebody's success that they're announcing or whatever, we may be saying something like, congratulations, and then under our breath, you motherfucker, and silently condemning them because that wasn't us. And this is a bigger picture concept, but it again comes back to social media and what I always say about how posting all the great things in our lives ultimately is not good for our mental health for this very reason, because all I'm looking at in the feed are all these great moments of people's lives. And so invariably, I'm going to compare myself to them and arrive at the conclusion that I'm not as successful, smart, sexy, deserving of love, talented, whatever it is. And my already low self-esteem is going to further take a hit. And so when I'm offered to go try some new activity with a friend or something like that, well, that involves me having to learn something, and what if I don't learn it correctly? Or what if this game is something that I won't be good at right away? There's even more things to feel shitty about myself, so I just won't go. Now, all these nefarious aspects of perfectionism are painting a pretty bleak picture. The good thing is like anything, it's the understanding that points the way to the freedom. In understanding this aspect of myself and how the dialogue that I've had with myself around doing it correctly is in fact this whole other thing, that allows me to have a different relationship with myself around getting anything done. And one of the things that's really helped me enormously is a very simple mantra. And so when I go to start something or undertake something or have to perform some sort of task, I'll tell myself at the beginning, we're going to do this good enough. And while I'm in the middle of doing that thing, I'll be asking myself constantly, is this good enough? Can I move on? Is it good enough? And when I'm at that stage of asking, is this good enough? It usually is good enough, and I can continue moving forward. And it's a way of keeping me unstuck. Because the fact of the matter is that my good enough as a perfectionist is very high level. And I think that that would be true of most perfectionists. We do not like doing things half-assed. And so our good enough is actually going to be good enough. But what the mantra does is it frees me from getting stuck in the obsessive loops. The other thing that I've learned to do, particularly when it involves other people or putting myself out there, like creating one of these episodes or supporting somebody or speaking in front of people, I'll say a little mini prayer that takes all the pressure off of myself in having to get it right. And that little mini prayer is, allow me to be the channel. Make me the channel for whatever the divine wants to communicate in this moment. It's a sort of mini surrender. And it gets me right out of my head. It gets me right out of ego. I don't have to say or prove anything to anybody. I don't have to appear in a way that makes me look a particular way or props up my self-esteem. I just start talking and trust that the right thing that I'm supposed to say will come out of my mouth. And so far, it seems to be working pretty good. So I'm going to leave it there. And until the next time, I'll see you guys soon.